You don't have the language because, very much like your friend, you don't care. And you don't have the language because you have the language of emotions, but you don't have the language of the intellect. In other words, because of the way you are, and to some extent because of the way you have nourished yourself, say music-wise, creatively, for the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you've expressed yourself through music. Okay? So when, for example, your companion asks you, "Why do you look so sad?" you say, "Let me go sit behind the piano and I'll tell you." And so you play her, some score. Or if she asks you, "Why do you feel so happy?" you will take her hand and you take it to the backyard and you say, "Look at the sunset." That's how you have been expressing your emotions for the past many years. Now the difficulty, and that's great, don't get me wrong, it's a good place to be, but it's going to backfire. It's going to do you wrong later on in the future. Why? Because eventually you have no choice but to interact with the people in this world. And you have to get a job. And there are going to be people who are going to disagree with you. You're going to have a superior who's going to tell you need to change. But more importantly, you're going to have a companion who, and life is messy. Ask anyone who's been in long-term relationships and will tell you. Kids will mess up your life. Companion will mess up your life. Not mess up in a negative way. They just make it, with too many layers. And you have to understand all these layers, that the desires of a 5-year-old is very much different than the desire of a 15-year-old. And so the way you speak to a 5-year-old, the way you entertain a 5-year-old is very different than the way you entertain a 15-year-old. And not to mention all the complexities that exist within the human individual without him or her having a companion, having children, having a job. So as an individual, you stand with a great many complications within. And then you live as an animal in a social world, and society has its own unique software. Every community does, and they're going to impose that software upon you. It's going to impact the way you think and feel and behave. So when you get to be 30 or 25 or 40, you're really, really quite complicated because you have so many things inside you. You have your own system of wiring if you're an introvert or an extrovert. You have had to deal with the fact that, your father was this way, your mother was this way, your family suffered from financial poverty, for example. Your father was a drunk, your mother was a little unstable. Then you had to deal with the community, neighborhood you had to live in, whether it was a gated community where people were privileged and looked at you but saw you as a foreigner or an immigrant, or it was drug infested. Then there is the problem of technology, video games, television, pornography. Then you have the problem of addictions of sorts. And then you have the issues that come to you as an adolescence. You have no idea who you are, no idea what you are, what you're going through, especially if you happen to be a girl, because your body begins to change. Hormonally, everything turns upside down. And for the first time, you realize that you as a human being are attracted to the same sex or the opposite sex. And that's a very, very difficult thing to navigate because you have zero experience. And add to the fact that you don't really understand desires, how they come about, how they impose themselves upon you, how attraction is born inside you and it guides you, and how boredom happens, how satisfaction happens. You have no idea any of those things, but you feel them, but you can't explain them. And so every time an intense feeling comes over you, you run to the piano. That's the only way you can express yourself. And then one day your wife or your companion, your parents come to you, or you want to raise your hand in a classroom and ask a question. But because your language has been one of creativity, classroom can be very creative, but for me to be able to respond to your question adequately, I need to understand what the hell it is you're talking about. And if you're mumbling here and there, and if you have no idea what you're talking about, you're just a bundle of feelings, then eventually I'm just going to dismiss you. And if this continues over and over and over again, every time your hand goes up, now you've been in the classroom, let's just say for 20 weeks, it's the 21st week, you've raised your hand in class every week, and every time your mouth opens to formulate a question, everything falls apart. In the end you say, yeah, I'm not really quite sure what I'm trying to say, I can't formulate the right way, so why don't I just shut up? And then the 21st week, having been exposed to, say, some student who's very creative on the inside but lacks the ability to express coherently on the outside, I just say, oh God, his hand or her hand goes up again. What the hell are they going to say now? And then eventually, I'm only going to give you a quarter of my attention, and in the end, because I know that you can't really speak well, it means you can't listen well. And the reason is, you're not perhaps at a stage where you say, okay, let me remove myself from creativity, at least when it comes to music and poetry and painting and drawing and sketching. Let me sit in my room and write my thoughts down, not in the form of a poem, and not in the form of a story. I'm going to very logically put down my emotions, why they are there. And that's what you do in a therapy session. They don't really care much about your feelings, but how you express your feelings. And very much like the way you were blaming your friend, not so much blaming, but you were critiquing whether or not he has the capacity to learn, to hear. And my response was, because he's addicted to a certain way of thinking. And the same thing is true for you, the same thing is true for me and everybody else in this classroom. We all have deficiencies, we all have limitations. We are flawed in a variety of different ways. Now, sorry? Sure.
I think I said this once before, it's not the game we were talking about, but something about the classroom and in my, psyche feelings, like your presence is very intimidating when I open my mouth. And I think I'm very hard on myself in the classroom in the sense of like feeling anxious about what I say and how I say it. But I think as a question, you can continue everything you're saying, but I do write my feelings like you said and formulate them logically. What would be the way to further develop my speech and how I express myself?
Number one, you say that, I'm not specifically talking about you, just in general, that in the privacy of your own room, you're able to sit back, observe the emotions that are taking place inside you, and then have your emotions go through this filtration system created by your intellect, because it's razor sharp, it sees everything very clearly. And then once you begin to see things with your mind's eye, your intellect, your vocabulary is expansive enough and you understand things clearly enough where you can kind of put everything within the cloak of language and you write them down. And so you say, well, I do this when I go home. I don't have a problem. But when I come here, there you are standing and there is something ridiculous about you. There is something ridiculous about your presence. And when I open my mouth, I begin to fear and I begin to tremble and my voice begins to shake. Okay, so there are a couple of things about that. Whether what you're seeing about me is a projection or whether it's a reality, I don't know. I'm not the judge of that. I'm going to come up with a conclusion. Whether I am actually what you say or whether I'm just a figment of your imagination. I'll leave that up to you. As time passes, you will understand. I went to San Francisco State University long time ago to get my master's. And I went there for one reason. I was living in Roseville. So Roseville to San Francisco is about a 2-hour drive. And if your class starts at 10 o'clock, you're going to be in traffic. Because there's traffic from 6 or 7 in the morning all the way till about 11. So I had to leave the house about 3 or 4 in the morning to get there, sleep in the truck that I had, and then my classes start. And I went there for one simple reason. There was a professor there named Jacob Needleman. And I liked him because of some of the books he had written, some of the things he had mentioned. I liked him because he had spoken about Gurdjieff a few times, a man that I enjoy reading, his works. And so because of him, I went there. And this is after the time I had spent some time with this Indian philosopher named Jiddu Krishnamurti. And so having read the works of Jacob Needleman, I said to myself, okay, it's worth me going from Roseville to San Francisco twice a week. And then initially I would go to his office and sit and just, hear him talk. And because of the books he had written and because of the way he was in the classroom, naturally, I would just move into silence. I was very, very quiet, inwardly as well as outwardly. And as I got to know him a little bit better, I realized that he is one way in his books, but quite different outside of the classroom. When I asked him questions, he mumbled. He didn't respond to me in a way that could satisfy me. And eventually, the way I had made him in my imagination began to fade. And then I began to slowly, I respected him, but I had lost my respect for him as a teacher, as someone I could go to for guidance about this and that. Now, there are a couple of things you need to understand. First, you and I are in a different position in life. You are 17, I am 60. So I am 3 times your age, almost. That in itself gives me a tremendous amount of power. Okay. Second, you have come from a tradition where you're forced, conditioned, programmed, kindly, gently, or harshly told to respect your elders. I am your elder. You can't just raise your hand and BS your way through this. So that's the second thing. Third, if I had come to class and something about you said, this guy doesn't really know what he's talking about. I should have just taken this class online because I can find the stuff he's talking about in books. I could go online and just figure out what philosophy is, okay? So you come to class and you realize that I say things that you feel. In other words, if you want to know what the Gospel of John is all about, so God has a certain feeling and he puts this feeling in a man named Jesus. And now what you have in spirit, you can now see in flesh. Okay. So I put to language everything that you feel. Okay. You feel them, you just don't know how to express them. So I allow your feelings, okay, to be contained in language, in words, and I put the words on the board. And all of a sudden, you don't see the board. What you see is yourself on the board. You get a glimpse of yourself on the board. Now, when I do all of these things, what I have that you don't have is power. You're intimidated by the power that I have over you. Language-wise, culture-wise, tradition-wise, age-wise, okay? And let's just say knowledge or wisdom-wise. Okay? So it is quite natural for you when you want to start an intellectual wrestling match with me to, before you raise your hand, you take a few seconds, you say, okay, how do I want to formulate my question or my statements? And then after kind of going through this inner battle within yourself, you assume that, yes, I think I have it all together now. And then, very heroically, you raise your hand And you say, I have a question. You say, yes, what is your question? And then the first couple of words that come out of your mouth sound okay, And then the third one, you flop. And then the fourth one, you flop even worse. And then you just give up. You say, I'm sorry, I just can't do this. I don't know why. It was right in my mind, I had it all pieced together, but for some strange reason, I just forgot. And that's how it is. Now, what you have is me in the position of power and you in the position of poverty. That's always going to make you feel nervous. Just wait until you go to job interviews. Whether it's at Home Depot or In-N-Out or, you're going to be interviewed to enter an Ivy League school. So you're dealing with a committee of 5 or 6 or 10 people sitting around the table and you're there, okay? And you're the target. And you're going to be nervous. They have the power to hire you. They have the power to reject you. They have the power to accept you. They have the power to make you. They have the power to break you. Now, and it's almost for certain that when the interview is over, you're going to walk away saying, man, I did such an awful job. Question number 2, I should have answered it this way. Question number 25, I should have answered it the other way. And rightly so, because you're put on the spot, you have to wing it. You have to be very present, very alert, and you have to be experienced in feeling, in thinking, and observing, and reflecting, in dissecting, and then expressing all of that to a committee that is making a judgment upon you. That is what it is. When someone in class raises their hand to ask a question, they're not just asking a question, they're being listened to by 50 people. They're being judged by 50 people. Above that, they're also being listened to by an instructor, judged by the instructor. Should the instructor find that the question is ridiculous, stupid, immature, childish, they have the power to embarrass the student. When someone in the back giggles because the question is ridiculous, all of a sudden you become self-conscious. So there are lots of things to worry about. And you will eventually get to a place, hopefully, where you have a great command over yourself. In other words, let me give it to you this way. When I first started singing, I didn't want people. Persian music has a good amount of sadness to it. First, because our culture is sad. Second, because our history has been sad. And when you have a sad culture, a sad history, a sad political government, a sad social environment, where there's always struggle, where foreigners, England, America, France, they just come, they get drunk behind closed doors and they just chop up the Middle East, on a piece of paper. And the Middle Easterns aren't even in the room. But, there are 2, 3, 4, 5 white guys sitting in a room saying, okay, America, you take this part, and oh, you Brits, you take that part. And you know what? We're just going to take this other part. I say, okay. And that's all it takes. And then all of a sudden, 2 months later, your country is invaded by all these people you've never seen, you've never met, you've never talked to. And they're saying, oh, by the way, this part of your land that you thought to be yours, it's really not. It belongs to France. France? What do you mean it belongs to France? Yeah, that's how it is. Now, if you only have bows and arrows and they have tanks, what the hell are you going to do? Well, you're going to fight for a couple of days only to realize that your people are getting massacred. So your chief sits with the president of France or, America and say, okay, listen, we give in, we submit, fine. Instead of you guys taking 98% of our resources, can you just take 95 instead of 98? Say, okay, you know what, because we're feeling generous today, we're going to take 97%. You say, okay, that's fine. And when you have that kind of a history, you can't but have a great amount of sadness and sorrow and resentment and anger in that culture. But the anger, because the culture has depth, the anger expresses itself in music, in poetry, in art. Okay? You don't go around shooting people. You don't have mass shootings. It doesn't work that way. We have riots where all people come together to change the political environment so that the social environment could be transformed. But we just don't go around killing innocent people, okay? Like the way this place has been for the past 30 years now. So when I first began singing, I didn't want other people whom I found to be strangers to be able to look at my face, to see my facial expressions, and to see what's taking place inside me. I didn't know them. I didn't care to know them. You know, my facial expression is my private space. I don't want that to be visible, to be shown to public. So I demanded, and because I have a very, very nice voice, I demanded that the lights to be turned off. And because in our gatherings, no one could sing like me, no one could inject emotions into singing like me, they had no choice but to turn off the lights. There came a point where we had gatherings so often that they got used to my singing. And so when they asked me to sing, and when I requested the lights to be turned off, they said no. We were now friends. They could now stand before me and say, no, we're not going to turn off the lights. God damn it, you sing. Now, we have this instrument called daf. It's a drum, you know. And I said, okay, only on one condition. Give me this drum. I'll put the drum in front of my face. I'll hold it this way so no one can see my face. I'll sing, but I'll sing behind the daf. And when you're singing behind this drum, what happens, your voice hits the skin and echoes back. So you even sound better to yourself. You know, I don't know how I sounded to the other people. And this is before we got microphones, amplifiers, you know, all these nice reverb and echo systems. And there came a point, and the reason why I had the daf in front of me, it's something that Nietzsche argued about some time ago, not to get lost in another digression. If you have seen the image of Nietzsche, the face of Nietzsche, what he has, what just stands out is he has this great bushy mustache. You know, it's like, it's a foot long this way and a foot long that way. And so it is such a distracting piece on his face that every time you want to look at him, look into his eyes, the mustache get in the way. So you don't get a chance to actually gaze into his eyes, you just look at his mustache. And then the conversation revolves around his mustache. So how long have you been growing your mustache? Why is it curved in this particular way? How often do you comb it? Do you wash it? What happens when you eat pasta? You know, do animals grow in it? Insects, you know, do you have a jungle in there, a forest, an ecosystem? Now, one time there was this clever young woman who goes to Nietzsche and she says, you're not going to fool me. He says, what are you talking about? I know why you have your mustache. I look into your eyes and I see a great amount of sadness. Why don't you just shave your mustache so people can see who you are really on the inside? And Nietzsche says something very, very interesting. It's something all of us have done for thousands of years. But Nietzsche, in a very eloquent, philosophical way, was able to put this human dilemma in words. He says, it is true that my eyes are the windows to my soul, but you must know that my soul is very precious to me. It's very dear to me. I value it a great deal. And I open my soul only to people I trust, only to people I value, only to people I love. And the truth is, I don't love very many people. I also know that human beings are born to be nosy. They like gossip. They look at my eyes and they say, oh, Nietzsche, you're sad today. What is your sadness? And the truth is, they ask not because they care. They ask because it passes time. It's chatter for them. I put my soul on the cross for them, but they only sketch it. They don't really know what's going on inside me. They don't see the pain. They don't see the loneliness. They don't see the misery and the tragedy, the hopes, the despair inside me. All they really want to do is have me get naked, stand there so they can sketch who and what I am on a piece of canvas. And I don't want that. And since my soul is pregnant with all these sacred emotions, I guard my soul really, really, really well. And tragically enough, for me, he argued that God, and I'm paraphrasing, these are not what Nietzsche said really, but he should have. So I am putting words in his mouth because he was perhaps ill-equipped to say his piece the way I am presenting him to you. He said, I had this unfortunate creator, i.e. God. Now, he may have believed that God is dead. I doubt that very much. But if there was a God who gave birth to Nietzsche, this God gave Nietzsche a pair of eyes that exposed him. You know, when you're walking down the street and a stranger passes you by and you happen to be in a very strange mood, you look at him or her and you say, "Good morning." And he looks at you and says, "Good morning, son. Have a good day." And he says it in such a way that it's like you become possessed and you all of a sudden stop in your tracks and the guy is passing you by and you look behind and you say, "Why did he talk to me in that way? What is his problem?" And it's not like he has a problem in your eyes in a negative way. You're mystified. It's as if he has said something to you and certain doors inside you have opened. And you say, "Okay, I'm young enough and kind enough. Let me stalk him." And you run after him and say, Sir, I think you dropped a $10 bill." No, he didn't. It's really yours. But it's a way for you to trap him. So you and him can sit and have a cup of coffee. And so for Nietzsche, he was given a pair of eyes that when you were to look into his eyes, all these things about you would open up. You would feel things, and those feelings would inspire thoughts. Thoughts would inspire reflection. And all of a sudden, you were put in this battle zone on the inside. You were to examine your life, reflect on your life, feel bad about yourself, or maybe feel good, who the hell knows. But Nietzsche knew that he had this power given to him by God because of his eyes. And very much like if you've seen the first Superman movie, with great powers come great responsibilities, Nietzsche has great powers. His powers exist in his eyes. He has the power to look people in the eye and make them feel bad about themselves. Kind of like Jesus Christ, that we killed Jesus Christ not because he was a wise man, but because he made us feel bad about who and what we are and how we live our lives. Nietzsche had that power, do you see? And so he looks at this young woman and says, "I am cursed because of this gift. I am cursed because of this power. Because all these strangers come to me, strangers who have no interest in knowing the value of pain, knowing the value of being introverted, knowing the value of despair, knowing the value of how to transform despair, sadness, sorrow into nuggets of wisdom. They have no idea what it means to be lonely living in the desert. And though for many people the desert can be a place where they will die, desert in fact is a place where I come to life. Because I see the barrenness of life. I see the hollowness that lives inside the human beings. And that inspires me. It makes me into a prophet. I am here to save the human being. That inside this desert, you can't see flowers. You can't see an oasis, a palm tree, a date tree, pool of water with great animals. You can find it. But you have to pay attention. And since not too many people desire that, the only thing I can do to distract them from looking into my eyes and seeing their own reflection is by having this great mustache. So instead of people looking at me and talking about my soul and ultimately their own soul, they'll talk to me about my mustache and how they can grow their own mustache like mine. And they'll ask me when I go out there to kiss someone, does my mustache get in the way? And all of a sudden, a great conversation about philosophy turns into a conversation about sex and this ridiculous things that people do while they have sex, you see. Now, I say all of this for one simple reason. Nietzsche had the power to mesmerize people, to intoxicate people with his ideas. But he was also wise enough to know that since many, many people are not really that interested, why should he spend all of his energy talking to people who are basically curious? They're not yet at a stage in life where they're really ready to learn, ready to listen. You know, what happens in listening is that you guys are sitting there and you're hearing all this noise. We call it language. We're talking. That's what you're hearing, just noise. Now, some of you may be fantasizing about other things. Some of you may be daydreaming about other things. Some of you may be asleep. Some of you may be playing with your phone. Some of you may be thinking about what you should have for dinner or lunch or whatever the case may be. You're just hearing noise in this class. In fact, I am a great interrupter of what's taking place inside you. You just want to focus on what you should have for lunch, and here I am rambling about, Friedrich Nietzsche, and none of you care. Now, something really interesting happens. Out of the great many noise that come out of my mouth, all of a sudden, I say something. Music. Now, out of 20 people who may be in this class, there is only one person who catches that particular word in a forest of noise. Now, you become very selective. Why? Because music is what you do. Music is what you like. Music is who you are. Now, you're not really hearing anything I'm saying. When you become selective, you become like a tax collector. I'm only in the business of taking, but I only take the things I'm interested in. Now, if my job here is to teach, and your job here is to learn, the truth is I can't teach and you can't learn, because all you're hearing is noise. And then once in a while, something that I say pushes a button inside you. You get triggered. Then you hear something, the noise. When you hear me saying music, 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 the hearing morphs into listening. First it's noise, then you hear, then you listen. As you're listening, you want to hear things that are relevant to you, which is, am I going to talk more about music? Am I going to talk more about the creative arts? And now, for the first time, you're paying attention after an hour of me rambling on. But you're not interested in philosophy. You're not interested in Nietzsche. You're interested in the word music because it connects you to what you like. I still can't teach you. I have to go through a whole host of issues that live inside you, so you can listen. You can hear, then listen to the things that I want you to hear, not what you want to hear. Now, for that to happen, I need to, you can't do this on your own. And this is all hypothetical, by the way. I need to first get rid of the stuff that live inside you. In other words, you can't have any triggers. Now, there's only one way that I can remove triggers from you. I'm not Jesus Christ, man. I don't have a magic wand. This is not a Harry Potter movie. where I can swing my wand and say, all that stuff. Remove yourself from his interior. It doesn't work that way. I'm not like Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Mark, where a father approaches Jesus and says, Satan lives inside my son. Can you please perform an act of exorcism? Remove Satan from him. And Jesus is fine. I'll do it for him. Since I'm not Jesus Christ, and since I'm not a figure in the Harry Potter movie, and since I'm just a regular man with little to no power, the only thing I know how to do to remove the things inside you is to push the triggers again and again and again and again. Now, there are going to be some problems in pushing the triggers, especially in the 21st century, especially in 2022, almost 2023, because a lot of people have triggers, and these triggers, for the most part, express themselves in a very violent way. Okay? Everybody is walking on eggshells. You don't really know what to say to anyone anymore without them going crazy. Because now, if you are aware, students are asking for safe zones, just in case an instructor uses a word or says a word that goes inside them the wrong way, they have the power to walk to the dean's office and form a complaint against an instructor because he used a word that made a student feel bad. Now the student needs to go to Kaiser and become medicated. I mean, these are real stuff. I'm not making this thing up. This is real stuff. This is what students do now. And students are this way because of the culture. Okay. Now, the problem with removing the triggers inside you, since I'm not a magician, is for me to push them. I'm not quite sure how you're going to react once this trigger is pushed. Maybe you'll walk away, drop the class. Maybe you'll walk away, wait for me in the parking lot. Maybe you'll walk away, run to the dean's office, form a complaint. Maybe you'll be fine. I don't know. And the next question is, in a culture such as this, where people have so many dysfunctions, do I want to take a risk in teaching you philosophy? That depends on where I am in life. Am I close to retirement? Am I in debt? Do I have a wife? Do I have kids? Do I need to pay for a mortgage? Do I have to pay for school? Or am I free from all these constraints? If I just don't care, then I'm going to go for your jugular. If, of course, you have expressed any interest in learning philosophy, and if I've become relatively attracted to you, that you ask questions and you pay attention, and I see your body language, and all these are attractive components I pay attention to. And just in case I realize that you are present, you ask good questions, you're a long ways from being able to learn, but you have the initiatory components that you know how to respect your elders. You know when to shut up when I look at you a certain way. You know how to sit the right way. You have those right things, okay? Now, those are only the external factors. The more complicated aspect now is what happens when I go inside you to see what's inside. When I use the word music, I don't want you to all of a sudden begin to fantasize about your world. I don't care about your world. You're a 17-year-old young man. You don't have a world. It's a very small world. There is zero experience in the world. You're a bundle of emotions with zero understanding and zero ability to express. Now, every time your hand goes up and you say, can I ask a question? What you really want to do is you want me to enter into your world. And I keep telling you, I'm not interested in you. This is a hypothetical. Please don't take it personal because it's not meant to. I'm not interested in going into your world, man. I have been a musician for 40 years. I know its language. I have been creative, not only in the classroom, but outside of it. I don't need to know that world. I'm not in that stage. I know your world well. I was rebellious like you. I lived in my room, toying with imagination all day and night. I dropped out of school to pursue music. I dropped out of school to become a professional tennis player and soccer player. I know how that world works. Don't invite me into yours. I've been there. I'm trying to get you, a 17-year-old, to feel, think, see, observe, reflect like a 60-year-old man. Your invitation, thank you, by the way, for trying to invite me into your world. Thank you. I'm just not interested. Your world is easy, it's cheap. My world is difficult, which makes teaching you difficult. Now, because you are able to play a few tunes on piano, you assume that, well, you can also, but what is philosophy but the music of words, language of ideas? If you can play piano, you can certainly play philosophy. Not true. Because each instrument demands a different language, has a different language, demands different things from you. So it's going to take me a long, and remember, I've had students who have been with me for maybe 20 years. They speak my language, they just don't understand it. I mean, good for them that they can walk away assuming that they understand. Good for them because it makes their life a bit more simple, less complicated. They are tortured less, depressed less, lonely less. But when I see them express themselves, when I hear them, so well, there isn't much I can do, really. I tried, failed. So, going back to the trigger points within the context of learning, within the context of Nietzsche, should you have the capacity and the stamina to allow me to harass you on a daily basis when you come to class, that every time you want to raise your hand, very mindfully you keep it down. Every time you want to open your mouth and ask a question, very mindfully you keep it shut. And you just allow yourself, despite all the volcanoes that may be wanting to erupt, you just say, okay, you know what, let me just keep my mouth shut. Let me just see what else he has to say. And then after maybe taking my classes for the next 5-10 years, then you say, okay, I think I'm able to hear what you're saying. I don't really understand, but I can hear it. Say, okay, well, for now it's good that you can hear, just hear. What happens when you're able to hear my ideas is that you will have this false assumption that just because you hear, you can see what's inside the hearing, the message, but you can't see. Even if you were able to see, you'll see all the wrong things. And I'm going to tell you, just hear and just listen to the things that you hear. Try not to understand. The hearing and its sibling listening will arouse feelings inside you, emotions inside you. Emotions of disgust, emotions of loneliness, of despair. Don't try to remove them because you can't. Don't try to understand them because you can't. You want to write about them, fine. Let your writing be free flow. Let it be organic. Don't be coherent. Don't be logical. Don't send me an email saying, I think I understand. You understand nothing. Just be with the emotions. Now, you may think it's easy. It's not. It's like you telling your father, Dad, I've read Tibetan Book of the Dead. I've read the American Book of the Dead. I've read Katha Upanishad. I've volunteered at Oakland mortuary. I'm going to wash corpses, sew them up, and bury them. I think I can do well with death. And your father says, son, you have engaged in some interesting things, but understanding and coping with death, especially if someone very close to you, no. And very arrogantly you say, no, Dad, I think I understand. Your father says, really? Yeah. Okay, sit close to me, and you do. Hold my hand, your father says, and you do. Count to 3, you do. And your father all of a sudden collapses to the floor. And you say, okay, Dad, I get it. He doesn't respond. Okay, Dad, I get it. He doesn't respond. What you didn't know, your father was this prophet. He never revealed this to anybody, not even you. He knew that it was his time to teach you a lesson. He was tired of life. He knew that life had nothing more to give him. His wife has enough money now. His kids are stable. The house is paid for. No one is under any debt. Okay? It's time for him to go. And it's time for you to learn a good lesson. That though you have been around death, it doesn't mean you understand it. And though you have lost your cell phone and you have grieved the loss of losing your cell phone, the truth is you don't really know what real loss is all about. And when your dad, your father dies, for the first time you realize you are really, really depressed, confused, mad, angry, sometimes even violent and enraged. So when I say that you hear, then you listen, and then emotions come up, don't assume that you know what to do with the emotions, because you won't. The emotions will drive you crazy. You will feel loneliness in ways you've never. You'll feel despair in ways you've never. You'll feel depression in ways you've never. And then my job becomes really, really difficult at that point. You know why? Who pushed your triggers? I did. Who forced you to listen? I did. Who pushed you into the desert of isolation? I did. Who must now take care of you? I do. Why? You are my creation. You're not the Bible's. You're not God's. You are my creation. Which means you need to come to my house every single day. I feed you. We sit. We talk. And then I say, it's time for you to go home. See you tomorrow in class. And then when your parents see this, they say, codependency is no good, son. You can think on your own. You're creative. You don't need anybody. And now doubt comes in. And then because of your parents' influence, you go online, you read stories about Amir Sabzavari, how wretched of a man he is, what kind of a liar he is, And should you encounter those statements often, should your parents influence you more often, one day you'll come to my office and you say, yeah, thank you, I'm actually relocating. Where are you going? I'm going to the moon. Now, the truth is, it has taken me about 10 years just to have you be able to listen. Not to understand, just to listen. And just to have you have the proper emotions. The next 20 years will be very, very difficult because I have to give you the language and the training how to place these emotions in proper containers. And that no one is willing to do. It's difficult.